Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Integrated Corridor Management Event Documentary, How Does ICM Work in Practice? My name is Kevin Vita, and I'll be helping with facilitating today's webinar. This webinar is sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration and hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, also known as NOCO. As a quick reminder, if you don't know already, at NOCO we offer a variety of resources to support the transportation systems management and operations community. On the lower right side of your screen, you can see a box called Useful Links. You can browse through these links for TSMO resources and news. Previous webinar recordings related to this topic can also be accessed from here. Now I'll cover a few logistics for today's webinar. We are recording this webinar, and the recording, along with the presentation slides, will be available through the on-demand learning section of our website. All the attendees are on listen-only mode by default, but we'd like you to stay engaged by using the question and discussion pod for comments and questions. We have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions, we encourage you to enter them in the questions pod as they come to your mind at any time. The questions will be read aloud one at a time by the moderator, and our presenters will answer each question. So that's all I have, and with that, I'll hand it over to our first presenter, Neil Speller, to start us off.
Thank you, Kevin. Welcome, everybody. This presentation is put together in concert with our contractor Noblis, and there's a presumption that you would have some, at least elemental, probably more familiarity with ICM. So we're not going to go into a whole lot. The first 6 slides or so are basically introductory, just to get us all on the same page, and then Noblis is going to take over with the main presentation. My name is Neil Spiller. I am in the Washington, D.C. headquarters office of FHWA, Office of Operations, Program Manager for ICM, and welcome you here. I don't know, Kevin, if we know where our guests are from, but maybe during the presentation, if you wouldn't mind taking a quick moment, guests, just let us know what agencies you represent, so we can have a kind of an idea and a broad spectrum of who we're speaking with. So let me get into it. Oh, where are we? Here we are. So the purpose of this webinar, again, is to provide an overview of the approach, but really to let people know, because we get a lot of questions, what really happens during an event. So I hope that's what is answered here, and that's the purpose of this presentation. What is ICM? Let me remind everybody that it is integration, which is the coordination and collaboration between the agencies, providing a robust whole response to an incident and not just singular siloed responses. We define a corridor as a travel shed of trips. If you think of a radial network in the Washington, D.C. area, we have a radial network around the Beltway. Up in Maryland, you have Connecticut Avenue, Georgia Avenue, Rockville Pike, I-95, and down in Virginia, you have 95 going down to Fredericksburg. You have I-66 going out west. You have 123. So a travel shed would be those trips that are contiguous to that to the major facility. For example, the I-66 would be a travel shed facility, but it would really just be that wedge that compromises the westernmost portion. And any trip that you probably would take on I-66 to get you someplace fast, if I-66 were shut down because of a major event or an accident or a weather event or a bridge hit or something like that, how else would you get through that area? Well, we're not talking about, going all the way up to Maryland or all the way down to Fredericksburg, but, there's Route 50, there's Route 7, there's Route 123, there's the Dulles Access Road, there's all sorts of opportunities along that corridor. So it's important to understand the concept of what a travel shed is, those trips that are anchored by that arterial. And what do we mean by management? We're talking about management of the whole, management of everything, the traffic signals, the messages, as many agencies as we can get to participate in order to achieve that response. ICM is an integrated approach. You see it quickly by this graphic right here. Management of all the modes and assets, or at least all the ones that contribute. And the more that contribute, the merrier, because it makes it easier. There are 3 legs to the ICM stool. These are the institutional leg, which is the coordination between the agencies. There's the operational leg, which is the operational strategies of the particular agencies. And there's the technical strategy of sharing information and including a decision support system, which we'll get into later. Briefly, what ICM is not, it is not siloed decisions. It is not optimizing individual systems. It is not a singular detour to get, to snake around one particular event. What it is a multi-agency response, multi-agency decisions. There are what we call business rules, which are permissions that the agencies have already let in advance and said that when an event happens, we are going to go ahead and permit these messages or these effects to take place as a response. So it is planned not the event is planned, obviously, but the reaction to the event is planned on how it's planned in advance how you're going to do it. The best way that I can describe this is if you think of a sporting event or a major event that's going to take place downtown, someplace, like a Million Man March, or a sporting event, a football game, or a parade, July 4th parade. There are weeks and weeks of planning that go into how the city is going to manage that event. Think of an ICM event as one that just pops up out of the blue. It's suddenly you don't have I-66 available to you anymore because those 4 lanes in that direction are shut down because the tractor trailer has turned over. That comes about very suddenly. So how do you deal with that almost instantaneously in the same manner that you would deal with a pre-planned parade or sporting event or march or something like that? So I'm going to hand this off to John now, and he's going to go through what would happen when that singular event takes place, and he's going to talk to us about an imaginary city called Alligator City, which has this solution available to them. John?
Thanks, Neil. My name is John Hicks, Transportation Planner here at Noblus. For the second part of today's webinar, the intent is, as Neil said, is to describe an ICM event in real time, meaning what is actually happening in the office or in the field, starting with before an event and the pre-planning that occurs with understanding your corridor and the particular challenges you face. Then we'll move through when an event actually occurs, the triggers, the responses, and deployment of ICM strategies. And then we'll close with what happens afterwards, collecting data and making tweaks as part of a continuous improvement cycle. And again, we're going to be using a hypothetical fictional city and corridor for today's webinar, but again, the examples include real-world components similar to other ICM deployments and reflect how real-world ICM deployments are managed around the country. So as I said, let's get started with the ICM pre-planning. Actually, before any ICM event and response occurs, there's a lot of pre-work that happens. So in the pre-planning stage, it begins with organizing a multimodal stakeholder group, who are the stakeholders and who is at the table and who is not at the table that needs to be. Identify the corridor and the boundaries, the target segments, collecting data to understand the corridor problems, as well as adopting a vision, goals, and objectives for your ICM deployment, all along with your partners and stakeholders, as well as developing a set of business rules, which essentially is a playbook that includes potential strategies and various thresholds for candidate response plans. And these business rules are important because they define the constraints for the decision support systems and other modeling simulation tools that an area may develop, or if that modeling tool already exists, update it and calibrate it. And we're going to go through these last 2 bullets in a little bit more detail. So a little bit more background on DSS, or decision support systems. ICM is typically implemented through a DSS, and in general, It's an information system that supports business or organizational decision-making activities, ranking, sorting, and choosing from alternatives. It's generally programmed to incorporate some sort of business rules and agreements with different stakeholders when making those recommendations. So in the ICM context, the DSS is constantly monitoring traffic conditions in a specific corridor, looking for data patterns out of the ordinary, and then when an incident or other event occurs, the DSS models and recommends alternative actions, again, which are defined in the business models to be taken in response. So it's been mentioned a couple times, so what do we mean by business rules? And these include the development of strategies and a number of candidate potential response plans in coordination with different agencies and stakeholders. And they're pre-agreed, kind of interagency agreements that feed into the response strategies and plans that affect the solutions that are modeled by the DSS. This could include an update to or even just implementation of a standard operating procedure for different agencies. They're also important to enhance stakeholder buy-in early on in the process, reduce uncertainties later on, and also increase the effectiveness of your ICM deployment. And I think one helpful way to think about it, as a kind of a chessboard, as the geographical constraints where the pieces interact and decisions are made, and then the chess pieces are the managers, operators, and agencies, each with their unique capabilities. And then the game rules are the business rules, which everyone agrees to play. So a little bit about our fictional city here before we go into the day in the life of ICM. This is Alligator City in Oconee County is our example corridor today. Like most rapidly growing metropolitan areas, it has significant congestion and mobility challenges. This map provides a little bit of context for Oconee County and Alligator City. You can see here the Marine Causeway, the Komodo Tunnel, and the Victory Island Bridge all connect to the West Hills. And as the metro area has grown, much of the growth in West Hills has put pressure on the limited capacity of these facilities crossing the various swamps and wetlands and rivers into Alligator City. So the stakeholder group collected data to understand different corridor characteristics and problems. And these problems, consistent complaints regarding unreliable commutes between West Hills and Alligator City, long wait times to exit the bridge and tunnel into the city. They also have poor visibility and flooding, crossing the wetlands. And then there's challenges with freight with the intermodal facility there in the city, causing congestion in downtown Alligator City. And this is an example of some additional data collection that took place to understand the issues. You can see congestion, travel times, and reliability all have significant increases in the past 6 months. And this is an example multimodal stakeholder group. Again, we have, you could have folks from traffic operations, transit operations, analytics, tollway ops, parking, TMC operators, regional MPO, lots of different agencies and stakeholders around the table to adopt the ICM goals, the vision, the objectives, and the business rules. So next, the stakeholder group identified the target corridor and its boundaries and 4 critical segments where conditions were determined to be most severe according to the performance measures they identified, delay and congestion index. Congestion index meaning % time traveling at speeds less than a certain threshold of the posted speed limit, and delay is in minutes, which we'll go through later in the webinar. They also developed business rules amongst their respective organizations, and this is sort of a menu of possible ICM strategies and various action or response plans for each one. And as I said, these business rules and strategies kind of form the constraints of the DSS and the recommendations it will turn out. Some example strategies, it could be pre-trip or en route traveler information, integration of ramp metering and arterial signal system, variable speed limits, a temporary increase in transit, or maybe some sort of dynamically priced toll lane usage. So how does the stakeholder group decide when to implement these specific strategies? First, you have to define thresholds for when these strategies would be implemented. And these thresholds are corridor specific and usually are defined using some sort of analysis, modeling, or simulation tool to help refine and define them. But at a high level, the event trigger threshold or ICM activation is the level of delay or congestion needed to initiate a DSS response. And then the recovery threshold is sort of during an ICM event, determining if the recommendation is improving, worsening, or having no impact on the situation. And then the termination threshold is the level of the delay or congestion to end the ICM event and resume quote-unquote normal operations. So now we're going to start sort of the day in the life of ICM. You can see this particular ICM coordinator here is an early riser. It's 5:30 in the morning. Each morning the coordinator wakes up, and there's a complete dashboard of events already created. The ICM system has developed. There might be a host of initial event creations along a different corridor, on different segments of the corridor, and the ICM coordinator can review each event, confirm the system is active and running properly. But as you can see here, no events have met the activation threshold for an ICM event. So the next phase the documentary will walk through is what happens during an actual ICM event. And in this phase, an event occurs that meets the activation threshold. The DSS is triggered. Candidate response plans are created for approval, and then the response plan is pushed out for implementation. So here we are 3 hours later. It's 8:30, and peak of the morning rush hour, and the ICM system is continuing to monitor the corridor here in Alligator City, and an event occurs. As you can see here, it has met the thresholds defined in the business rules, agreed to by the local agencies. And again, these triggers and thresholds are based on a comprehensive set of metrics, modeling a historic baseline of the corridor. So the system provides an alert to local agencies that an ICM event has occurred. And you can see here that the event occurred on segment 3, and the congestion index and delay thresholds have been met on segment 2 and 3 of the corridor, but not yet down on the downstream on segment 4 or upstream on segment 1. So at 8:31 a.m., just a minute later, you can see congestion and delay continues to build, now pushing, as you can see, segment 1 over the activation threshold as well. And at the same time, immediately after the event meets the activation threshold, the business rules engine of the DSS is triggered. And the DSS begins modeling one or more kind of suites of response plans, including here, as you can see, option 1, 2, 3, and 4. Option 4 including the do-nothing alternative. And these suites of strategies, or suites of response plans, contain various combinations of strategies, again, that were agreed to by the local agencies. And the DSS is scoring each option in real time. If the solutions are predicted to be significantly better than the do-nothing alternative, then the response plan with the best outcome is recommended for approval by the local agencies. So after scoring each option, the options for the response plans are sort of pushed out to the local partners for review. The DSS proposes a detailed response plan for each strategy, including the assets to be deployed and used and where they'll be used, the current and proposed ramp metering rate, for example. And after they push those response plans out to the regional partners, the system will pause for, say, 5 minutes as local agencies review all the options, including the do-nothing alternative again, and to approve the recommended option here, option 1. So after the 5-minute pause, the response plan with the highest score, option 1, is accepted, and the response plan is pushed into the field for implementation to really try to start, getting back down to that recovery threshold. And again, all the various agencies have pre-agreed business rules for which they're operating from and implementing the response. For this particular response that was picked, for example, it could include, as I said, pre-trip and en route traveler information, integration of ramp metering with signal systems, as well as a temporary increase in transit. So here we are at 9 a.m. The response plan has been implemented. At this point, the ICM system is continuing to monitor the corridor to determine if the response plan is actually working or needs to be adjusted in some way. In this case, it appears that the delay and congestion index are declining towards the ICM recovery threshold, as you can see on the right. So the team sort of decides to stay the course with no changes to their proposed response and the implementation of the response. And here we are at 9:30 a.m. So the system, again, is continuing to monitor and produce response plans and monitor the progress of the response plan. This is about an hour after the event occurred. And you can see delay and congestion have both fallen below the recovery and termination thresholds, which triggers the conclusion of the ICM event, and the response plan ends and normal operations. And so then once the event has been terminated, we move into the post-ICM event stage, where it's, we're collecting data and learning from each event and continuing to tweak the ICM system based on the event. There we go, frozen screen here. There we go. So after the event, here's the regional stakeholder group again coming back together to sort of have a retrospective debrief about the ICM event, see what worked, what didn't, how they can improve. Agencies can collect data from each event, continuing to tweak their simulation models and various thresholds. Maybe the thresholds are too high, and the ICM system was not triggered when it should have. Those are all things that you can tweak after an event. And this post-event data collection, recalibration, and refinement is part of the continuous improvement cycle of ICM. That's very important. So we're going to wrap up here before our Q&A. There are a host of resources available on the FHWA Corridor Traffic Management website. The URL is at the bottom of the page. There's a host of fact sheets, white papers, other reports, available here. And then I would recommend checking out, there's a new FHWA Integrated Corridor Management video available as well. We have a few screenshots here at the bottom of the video, but I would definitely recommend taking a look at this. And just a couple screenshots to give you an idea of what's in this video and an overview of the Icm concept. It includes an example showing how a host of different agencies are needed for a holistic ICM response. It has examples from San Diego and Dallas about how all assets being involved in an ICM response. It has an example of a dashboard of events similar to what we kind of discussed here a few minutes ago for an ICM system. And also has interviews with real-world ICM practitioners on their own ICM deployments here. Here's one from San Diego, as well as some best practices and how to get started, and some lessons learned from other agencies. So with that, I'm going to stop, and we can, if Neil has nothing else to add, we will move to the Q&A part of the webinar.
John, you still on? You kind of cut out there.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I hope everybody else can.
So hi everybody. This is Carl Wunderlich from Nobles. I'm going to be organizing and emceeing a little bit of the Q&A session here so far. I just want to throw it to you quick to see if you had any other closing comments. Like John had asked you that, but since his audio got a little cut off, I wondered if you had any closing remarks here before we jump into the Q&A, or whether you'd like us to move directly into the Q&A.
I want to thank John and Carl and Noxie for what I think is a great presentation. Of course, I'm biased, but I think it's a great presentation to tell people what happens. I don't know if we rushed through it, but I just want to go back, John, and just cover how the event is turned off and returned. And what we're talking about is, if it's not being facilitated by the DSS and the ICM event, then what we're talking about is normal operations. You still have a traffic operations center. You still have people out there doing their individual jobs, the transit people watching the transit, the roads people watching the roads, the emergency people, still responding to fender benders and things like that. But it's important to understand that when a super event occurs, or an event that triggers, and that's an important word that was in this conversation, was trigger. When you hit that trigger and DSS takes over, everybody is now working together as a big team. So John, can you just go over just either go back to the slides or just cover when an event is turned off or deemed, how it's released?
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm going to go back to the event conclusion slide. 1 second. The slide, Neil?
Yeah, I guess I must have been looking away during this slide, but I see it now. But go ahead. Just
no problem.
Quick,
yeah, so this is sort of the, it's 9:30, so we're T plus 60 minutes here, an hour after the event, and you can see, with the continued implementation of the response plan across all 4 segments, we have the delay and congestion index below the predetermined recovery or termination threshold. So that's the key threshold we're looking for to sort of end an ICM event and turn off the response. So that's sort of how this event ended. Does that help answer your question, Neil?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate it. Again, I don't know what my situation was here. That I might have been sleeping through this. I very much apologize, but I just want to make sure everybody got that there is a point in time when it's handed back, so to speak, to the operations, the normal or nominal operations. So, Carl, why don't you go ahead with some of the questions? And
okay, great.
I want to point out we're international. We've got a gentleman from Singapore on with us.
Yeah, and in fact, Nathaniel, thank you for joining us. I did look up on Google. It turns out it's 1:30 in the morning right now in Singapore. So a dedicated ICM fan. Thank you, Nathaniel, for joining us. We appreciate the dedication and the actually cogent question at 1:30 in the morning. That's pretty impressive. So I'm going to read it out here, and then I'm going to throw it to Neil first, if you want to take it, or John, if you'd like to. Let me just read it out. I'll throw it to you, Neil, first, and then you can pass to John or take it. Nathaniel's question is, so if nothing is agreed upon within 5 minutes, the system automatically goes with the option that has the highest percentage rate, so in this case, percentage rate being the rating that John was showing on the screen there that the DSS presents. And Nathaniel continues, and is 5 minutes typically enough time for all parties to be involved to coordinate their response? Neil, you want to start, or throw it to John?
Sure, I'll start. I'll try and be quick. So the first answer is yes and no, and the second answer is 5 minutes may actually be more than you need. But let me talk about yes and no. The system is going to recommend which of the different alternates over the do nothing scenario, or it could recommend to do nothing if the do nothing is the best, but usually it's not. But there does need to be some kind of acceptance, if you will. In San Diego and Dallas, it was a little bit different. In one case, there was kind of an overall Icm coordinator or czar, if you will, who made the decision on behalf of the team. In the other case, it was a bunch of people getting onto their cell phones or their computers and saying yes, yes, yes. The 5 minutes is more or less an arbitrary limit, but it just takes as long as it takes for people to get to their screen or to respond to their phone to an alert that says, Icm wants to kick in, are you with us, type of thing, and then all you do is you click that yes or no on behalf of your agency. So it could take a minute and a half or 2 minutes. It could take 7 minutes, but 5, it's just the kind of an arbitrary estimate, just to say that there needs to be some time to confirm that the whoever is in charge, and that might be one person or one agency, or it might be a collective number of people, have agreed, yes, we're going to go with that option.
Great, thank you, Neil.
Yeah.
John Hicks, any additional color commentary to what Neil had to offer there?
I would just add, I think basically the 5 minutes and however the approvals work would definitely be part of the business rules that are agreed to beforehand. And again, the 5 minutes, I think, as Neil said, is just an example. Again, that's something that can be further defined with all stakeholders. Is it 1 minute or 20 minutes? It's sort of up to those of the different stakeholders that would be defined beforehand.
Right. The other thing I'll throw in there is that another thing to consider is the transition time to get the new plan into place. I mean, you just can't reset traffic signals, yet they have to be migrated into the new plan. Other types of things in terms of travel information may have some latency that needs to roll out. So this notion that a decision is made in 5 minutes also doesn't imply necessarily that the plan goes into effect at the end of that 5th minute. So one of the things that I think we've learned a fair amount about Icm in the last decade or so, honestly, is that these triggers are critical thresholds for identification, but the assessment of when plans can be implemented and how they can be appropriately implemented and how decisions are made, it's not so much the decision time within this 5 minute period that becomes critical is what is the transition time to roll the plan into place, because the system continues to be dynamic. And so you can't just immediately flip from plan A to plan B to plan C at the tip of a cap. You've got to take into account the fact that some of the projected controls may take up to 15 minutes to completely be implemented. So before I go on to the next question, just our other colleague Manashi Vasudevan, anything you'd like to offer on this one, Manashi, before we move to the next question?
All right. So I agree with everything that Neil and John and you said, Carl. And I just wanted to add that when you're trying to when your decision support system is trying to assess when the system is going to recover, I think you also need to account for that for the transition time. So how does the system evolve in the time that it takes to make the decision and also to transition? And then you can. So that's how you select your time. So it's not just based on the business rules, but also the time it takes for transitioning. And then, you need to assess the impact of how, the system is going to evolve within that time.
Absolutely. So persistence above the threshold is another sort of critical determiner. You don't want to wait too long. Let's wait around for 20 minutes above the threshold to do something. But you also don't want to shift into a plan if there's some blip in the system that's just moved you just above the above that threshold for a moment. So it's other things that are critical to the pragmatic nature of shifting to a Icm deployment, like John outlined here for the hypothetical but realistic Alligator City that we use to sort of compile all of the insights and lessons learned from the folks with active Icm sites out there. All right, so next we'll move on to Faisal Salim. Hi, Faisal, thank you for joining us. He's got a great question here that relates to modeling. I'll read it out. He says, modeling, in this case, maybe traffic simulation modeling, for example, is an expensive and resource-intensive endeavor, more so if the ICM corridor entails significant miles in a grid system, such as in Phoenix. So are there alternative approaches to modeling? And I think this relates to, I mean, we can talk about modeling in general in support of ICM, but I think perhaps, in Faisal, you can type in if we got it slightly wrong, this may be related to John's comment before about the development of a playbook or the elements of the playbook and their selection. So there's both the front end pre-planning and the refinement of those plans, and then there also could be modeling simulation as part of the DSS and the evaluation of the plans. So may I'll start at the top with Neil. Neil, any comments you'd like to make about modeling for Faisal?
Yeah, I'm going to be short, and we all need to be short too because we have to get a bunch of questions in. My first response, really my only response, is each ICM travel shed is different, and so you're going to have to set up multiple ones. So in a radial system, you know, if you think of a radial system as a pizza pie, you know, you're going to have 6 or 8 pieces, and each one of those is individually unique. So you can't really set up a system that covers like an entire region, you know, the Washington, D.C. region, because the Washington, D.C. region has the 66 corridor, the I-95 corridor, the 95 South corridor, the Route 50 going out east corridor, you know, Rockville Pike corridor. I mean, so it's not a one-size-fits-all. So that's my answer.
Great, thank you, Neil. John, any comments on modeling?
I'm good, Carl. Thank you.
All right, I'll definitely throw it to Menashe. I'm sure she's got some things to say, and I'll also just quickly throw a point to Kevin if he's listening in. I think we've got a bot in the chat box that we need to kick. So while Menashe answers the question on modeling, I'll ask Kevin to police the discussion pod. Go ahead, Menashe.
So, right, so modeling, I don't know which specific question am I on because I see a bunch of modeling questions. I guess as Neil said, it really depends on your, your corridor and your ICM implementation. But modeling is one way. The DSS can be a model-based DSS, or you could make your DSS a rules-based DSS. But other ways of trying to assess the, the alternate approaches to modeling is, of course, prediction. But again, for prediction, you need a whole lot of data. So if you have the data, then you might as well model it because prediction has some limitations as well. So I don't know what else to say here.
Yeah, the other quick thing I'll throw in, Faisal, is that so you can use observed data. You can have a collection of fixed playbooks, plays to execute. Where the modeling comes in handy is when you are confronted with a situation that has not occurred in the past yet. So it's a little bit related to the question that Susan asked next. These sort of combo events or collection of things that have not been seen before. The tool may be, without modeling, the tools themselves maybe have a difficult time correlating the conditions they see with any historical record, and so may or may not make very accurate assessments of what may happen. But I think that just depends on the quarters, like Menashe said. But I would say that to me is the top item for modeling. And in fact, if you've never had ICM in a quarter before, tools, particularly in the front end, to develop the playbook, this list of potential plays that could combine to generate a response, is oftentimes a really great way of understanding what's working, what's not working. All right, I'm going to move on.
Well, let me jump over Susan's question real quick because Faisal has a follow-on which is related. Are there alternate approaches to modeling? And let me just put a plug in for James Collier's our peer at Office of Operations, has a program called an AMS, Analysis, Modeling, and Simulation, which gets into this more. It's a kind of a right-hand glove, left-hand glove thing, how each one fits, the particular situation. I would suggest, Fazal, you and anyone who's interested in getting into the modeling side of it, we would be more than happy to bring an AMS webinar or meeting, workshop, out to visit you or have something set up. So if there's interest in doing that, I would check out the AMS as a link or as a term on the Office of Operations website, and you might get some more information on that.
Right, great point, Neil. Great point indeed. All right, so let's take on Susan's question here. So Neil, we'll start with you again. So how is it handled if one event occurs in the corridor, but during the first event, a second event, like a crash, occurs? So I think we covered some of that, but any other comments you'd like to offer?
Well,
Neil,
that's when I throw my hands up and I run around like a crazed maniac saying, how did this happen? How did this happen? I think if it's going to be, if you're talking about an incident, Susan, that's subordinate to the main incident, we're going to have to live through that. And the DSS might be re-triggered to come up with a new set of alternates. That could very easily happen. I think we first have to treat it, though, kind of the way the medical community treats it, which is, the oath, the medical oath, first do no harm, and make sure that we're not the cause of whatever this accident was. It could very well be. Congestion begets accidents, and accidents beget congestion. So it's hard to say that one wouldn't be the cause of the other. But I think the short answer, or the best answer that I would give you is, yeah, you continue doing what you're doing. You might have to change the DSS, but if this is a subordinate incident that's inside the demarcation of the original incident and the problems, we're going to have to work through it.
Great, thank you, Neil. John, anything that you'd like to offer up about the?
Yeah, I agree with that, Neil. I think this is sort of part of the continuous monitoring during an event and after the response is implemented. It's still, you don't just implement and, throw up your hands and let it go. There's still, see if it's actually improving and see if you need to make any tweaks. Is your response working, and does a second event occur that requires a tweak? So I think those are all things that are included as part of that.
Yeah, I tend to use sports analogies. So, if you're losing at halftime, you're going to have to go in and make some changes and try something different in the second half. And that's what the DSS does. During the event, the DSS should be, and probably is, continuing to monitor and say, well, this isn't working. Let's open up a different ramp, or let's close something up ahead, or let's get some more transit response, or let's put up a different message on the DMS. So, yeah, you may have to make a change in strategy, but you'd be led by the DSS.
Great, thank you, Neil. Menashe, anything else to offer on the secondary crash question from Susan?
No, actually, I agree with what John was saying, that it shouldn't, once you do your DSS, once you kick it off, doesn't mean that you don't go and tweak it based on the changing conditions. So you should absolutely, if things have changed, then you need to check, enter the parameters and see what additional changes need to be made, whether the additional strategies need to be implemented, or if the existing one needs to, if you have to sustain it. So that it's an ongoing process.
Great, thank you.
You have to understand and keep in mind that you're not really controlling what's happening on the ground at the moment. The incident responders vis-a-vis the police and the fire rescue, they have the control on the ground. That's what's happening. You can't rush them. You can't ask them to change something different. You can't have them, not respond, obviously. So what you're trying to do is respond to their response. I mean, they've shut down 3 lanes but not 6. They've they're coming from the opposite direction, so there's opposite lanes that are involved as well. They're shutting off a ramp because they're shutting off an area of the highway because they're going to land a helicopter. I mean, you're responding to what they're doing on the ground, and so it's a moving event that you have to take care of.
Great, thank you, Neil. If nothing else, I'd like to move on to Brent Kane's question, which is an excellent one. It comes with a comment at the front end, which is the devil's in the details. We agree. ICM is obviously different for various areas. So can you talk more specifically to the DSS and its makeup and operation? And I guess I'll throw in a side question here. Maybe I'll throw it to John first because he did the whole DSS collection to start, and we'll go to Neil next. And so, do you have to have a DSS to do ICM? Is that a requirement? And then I guess if so, or based on that question, can you talk more about the DSS and its makeup and operation that Brent has brought up? John?
Sure. I'll take the first one first, I guess. I would say, it's not like absolutely essential for your ICM deployment, but I think, it's strongly encouraged, and I think there's benefits to having the DSS, particularly for more complex corridors for kind of real-time scanning of different events along the corridor. So I think it's the benefits are pretty clear. And then just in terms of what goes into the DSS, I think it's the DSS is is a concept that's used in various industries. But I think in the ICM context, and I think it's up to what the inputs to the DSS are sort of up to the business rules that are agreed to with the agencies are the inputs to the DSS. So I think that's sort of the makeup of it. Neil, anything else to add?
Let me just add. I mean, on the screen right now under resources, there's a shot of the website, and at the very bottom, one of the resources in the bulleted items is a DSS report, Elements of Business Rules and Decision Support Systems. Get that, Brett. That's your starting point. And again, I am entirely happy if you need to contact me later and we put something together, either specifically on that question or for a region, any region out there, not just Brent, but anyone that's listening. If we can bring a specific topic to talk about DSS, to talk about what are stakeholders. There's videos out there. There's kind of the ICM 101 stuff. What is ICM that you need to present to your mayor, board, and council to help to explain to them? There's short one-pagers. I always refer to the one, what are the 10 most successful candidate items that you need for an ICM. That's just a one-pager. Get that one. I don't know if that's up on the screen. That might scroll down a little bit lower, but there's a lot of robust resources that we have available, and the DSS, there's a very good, I think, document that explains that.
Great, thank you, Neil. Just to cover some of the additional questions that have come in here, let's jump down to Nathaniel's additional question from Nathaniel related to the triggers and the threshold. Maybe we'll send it to John since he was one who covered that in the briefing. So as you can see, Nathaniel here says, is the threshold flat or can it include other percentages, plus or minus the 30% or 50%, for example? Traffic conditions are no doubt dynamic, so I don't suppose a fixed threshold would be ideal. So John, you want to talk briefly about the thresholding and the how to craft those effectively?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of goes back to the discussion on modeling as well. That's how you're going to develop an effective threshold is sort of understanding the historical nature of the corridor and then setting those thresholds correctly. And again, I think if you can also continuously tweak that threshold as part of the post-event continuous improvement cycle. But I think it really does sort of depend on using modeling tools to help you define that threshold accurately and well, so you can not just making a guess, and setting the threshold way too low, and the ICM system is turning on for when it shouldn't, or way too high when it's not turning on and it should. Neil, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, this is a great question because it did occur in real life, real experience for San Diego. San Diego and Dallas, remember, they were proof of concept demonstration projects, and the purpose of them was to show, how, if, and when, and how do you perform ICM? Does it work? Can you make it work? What does it take to make it work? So they were demonstration projects, and at the very beginning, especially in San Diego, their threshold was quite high, and they didn't get very many events. And another thing I always say is, ICM is we're like the vampires of the world. We sit around, hoping, and I use that in quotes because I don't really mean that, but, that an event occurs such that we can test ICM. But in order for an event to occur to test ICM, it means something almost tragically has to happen out on the roads, and we don't want that to happen, obviously. So what we're trying to do with ICM is to take a 6 or an 8 hour event, shutdown, major event, whether it's weather or accident or major turnover or a bridge hit or something like that, and dilute the response or the delays that people are going to exist. Instead of 6 to 8 hours, let's maybe make it 3 or 4 hours. So we have not made the incident go away, but we've made the duration go away. So in San Diego, getting back to this duration thing, they set the threshold quite high at first, and they only had maybe 1 or 2 incidents a week. So they lowered the threshold, and then they ended up with 7 or 8, and that really was probably too many. And then they readjusted it up again, and they ended up with about 3 to 5 or 3 to 4 a week. So those are the kinds of numbers that you're talking about. You're not talking about an incident a day, or you're not talking about 3 a day, certainly. You're talking about the worst of the worst conditions. Otherwise, hopefully, traffic operations, normal traffic operations that are done at a TMC are doing their job, and people are responding, and incidents are being responded to if they're fender benders or somebody's got to change a tire or something like that. But hopefully those events aren't. Maybe they're not happening during the peak hours. Even a fender bender during peak hours can turn into a major event. But if a fender bender happens off hours, it's not going to trigger the DSS. So yeah, the triggers are adjustable, but they probably need to be refined over, again and again, because, is 1 or 2 a week the right number, but maybe 10 and 12 a week is way too high. So yeah, they have to be refined.
Yeah, I just add that the job of refining your responses is a job that never goes away. You never think that just because you have the playbook that you're done and that everybody can just go home and watch the system run. That turns out to be a really bad strategy, and keeping your stakeholders engaged so that you can refine those things and make the systems work, make the thresholds work, requires active participation and continuous improvement, I think, as both John and Neil pointed out earlier. So we've got about 8 minutes left, got a couple more questions to cover here, and I do want to give John and Neil a couple moments just to wrap up here.
And Carl, I got to tell you, I have a very hard quit time at 59 minutes of the hour, because I have to have this phone available between 2 and 3 o'clock for a call from my wife's, from our insurance company. All right. So I'm only on for about 5 or 6 more minutes, but when I shut off at 1:58 or 1:59 my time, you guys, if you're still on, we'll have to continue it. So in advance, I want to thank everybody for participating and say what a great event this was. And I'll leave it to Carl and John, and I'll listen in, but I'll probably snap off in a couple minutes.
Perfect. Thank you, Neil. And not to put any additional words in Neil's mouth, but I think he's also several times mentioned that the ICM program is certainly interested in working with folks that are out there from the agencies that have an interest in ICM. There's a great deal of resources that the program has. Neil, of course, is the point of contact and the conduit for all that information. So not to put Neil on the spot anymore, but if a question comes to mind or you have additional requests for information, you want to dig into something like the AMS question of thresholds, certainly reaching out to Neil is the best way to
yeah, and I noticed that James Collier and Ralph Volpe are on. They could also might provide some context to any of those questions if they wanted to on the AMS. But let's go on with the regular questions.
All right, terrific. So I'll jump down to Vanetta Gillette's question, who asks, can ICM strategies be used in combination? So this is not so much about the thresholds or the models or anything like that, but rather the components, the strategies, the traffic signal control plans, the incident management plans, traffic information plans, for example, that all go into the making of an ICM plan. John, would you like to start on this one? ICM strategies used in combination.
Yeah, I would say absolutely they can be used in combination. And that's sort of, again, part of the business rules is, sort of which responses are combining which strategies, and the DSS will assist with that as well. And I think you can model different scenarios as well when, one strategy is compared with 2 or 3 other strategies, does that result in a better response? So I would say absolutely yes. Neil?
No, I'm just listening.
Great. Meenakshi, anything to offer on ICM strategies?
No, the only thing is that when you're trying to assess what strategies to, what combination of strategies to implement, you should try to figure that out systematically. Test out. Again, everything needs to be done maybe in an AMS, in a model, and see, okay, strategy 1, what's the benefit? And then bring in strategy 2, and then see what the benefit is. Then bring in your strategy 3. That's how you decide. Don't just throw all, if you have like 3 or 4 strategies, don't just bring them all together and try to assess, because you may not need all 3 or 4. You may get the most benefit from just maybe 2 strategies. So do it systematically. But yes, you can combine.
Perfect. Thank you, Meenakshi. Next question is from our friend in Singapore, Nathaniel, who's a question of more institutional nature here rather than the technical nature. So in a typical event, how many stakeholders are involved, any minimum, maximum, and average numbers, and how do the numbers contribute to the efficiency of a coordinated response? John, would that start?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's like a set. You need like 10 stakeholders. I think you need however many stakeholders it takes to have a holistic response. And so I think that's how many stakeholders you need. That's probably not a great specific answer, but I think it's very corridor specific, and it takes however many it takes to have a holistic ICM response. I guess how the numbers contribute to the efficiency. I would say, I think the more stakeholders you have, the more complex it could be, but I think the more effective it's going to be if the more stakeholders are involved.
Great, thanks, John. And so the institutional side, what I can tell you, Nathaniel, is that John's general comment about the more the better is absolutely true. And in fact, just a couple of years ago, together with our colleagues at Cambridge Systematics, we worked on an NCHRP project that related to expanding the ICM partnership base to include some diverse operators, including freight operations, law enforcement, incident management, and even folks who represented the pedestrians and other folks in essentially the surrounding neighborhoods. And I think that was a very effective project, got very good reviews. I can try and find the report and put it into the chat box here for your reference. So even parking management turns out to be a really critical element of ICM for a number of the real-world implementations. So it tends to go beyond just the first 2 that people generally think of, which is freeway and then arterial traffic signal management operations, and then maybe transit is the next pull. But I don't think that ICM really starts with a minimum set of stakeholders. It depends on the particular problem in the corridor that you're trying to manage and solve. But in general, the most successful ICM deployments have generally attracted additional stakeholders over time. And so if you look 5 years into deployment, the roster of participating agencies tends to grow significantly rather than stay the same. I know Neil's probably dropped off by now. Meenakshi, anything to offer on the institutional side?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay, terrific. So I think Adam Perez has a comment here related to the secondary or the follow-on incident, and then we agree that the DSS would recalculate depending on the second one is upstream or blocking different lanes. Susan has a comment here about, I think, reiterating Neil's halftime adjustments metaphor, which I think is accurate. And I don't know that I see additional questions. I have to scroll down here a little bit. Yeah, no, I don't know that we have any additional questions in the chat box. Please tell me in the chat box if I have been missing something. But in any case, I on behalf of Neil and our sponsors at FHWA and the ICM program, like to thank everybody for your active participation and your again, Nathaniel for getting up at 1:30 in the morning, and everybody else for taking up part of your workday here to learn a little bit about ICM and share your questions with us. Like I said before, Neil manages the program with a tremendous number of resources. So if there's any additional information you'd like to pull, more details on thresholds, more details on the development playbooks, more on the utilization of models and simulation to enhance ICM, more on the design and implementation of DSS. We certainly do have, the program certainly has a great wealth of information to share with folks on this. So I guess I will take Nathaniel's last question here on the more of the merry institutional question. I wonder if there's papers related to the efficiency of response, something like the TRB paper. Yeah, I think it's NCHP 03137, 131, no, 03131, 03137 is a different one, is the one. Maybe Nathaniel, I'll try and dig that up and put it into the box here. Otherwise, maybe I can look for it elsewhere and send it back to you. But I think that's I don't know if there's anything quantified, and I don't think anybody's done a quantitative assessment of the right number of stakeholders have for ICM, right or wrong. I think it would be very locality dependent and network dependent to say what the right number is. I think in general you get more bang for the buck when you engage more folks. Of course, there's some limit to that, but I think in general, for example, the engagement of law enforcement and incident management into ICM has soothed some of the implementation problems that we've seen in terms of understanding who's in control of what and making sure that they know what's going on around them. There's been significant benefits from the ICM sites that have, for example, directly integrated law enforcement and integrated and incident management folks into their operations. All right. So with that, I know Neil is signed off and can't take any more questions or any wrap-up comments. I will throw it to Meenakshi to see if there's anything she'd like to throw in at the end here, in addition to our thank yous to the folks who joined us today.
So the only thing I just wanted to remind people that, as Neil said, if you are interested in, attending any of, or even, attending any of the AMS workshops or training, please get in touch with James Collier from FHWA. I think James, that was the only point that I wanted to make on how to use AMS specifically for ICM and TISMO.
Right. I think James is with us, but cannot unmute. So we tip our cap for James. Thanks for joining us, but we can't unmute you at this point. Which leaves us with John. John, any last words before we wrap up? And we'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, the slides are available for download, I think. And Neil's, I know Neil's contact is at the end of the slide deck. I don't think James is, but definitely reach out to James Collier as well with any questions. But no, thanks all for the questions, and thanks for joining.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, are you still there? I don't know if you want to wrap up or say anything on behalf of this of the Center of Excellence before we sign off here.
Yeah, I wanted to give you guys a chance, but thanks everyone for attending today's webinar, and thank you for your participation. Thanks to our presenters, to Neil, to John, to Carl, to Meenakshi. We received some good information. Like I mentioned in the beginning, a recorded version of this webinar along with the presentation slides will be available on the NOCO website. On behalf of the National Operations Center of Excellence and our presenters, thank you for joining us, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Kevin.